meeting to order. Thank you, Tricia. We'll call the meeting to order. The first agenda item is a public comment period. I don't know if there's anyone who's joining us who would like to speak or say something. I continue to wait for the awkward Zoom silence. So
I don't
I
see
think
anything like that.
there we go, great. Then next, I would imagine there's no committee responses. So we'll go to the approval of minutes from the September 7th meeting. I don't know if folks had a chance to see the minutes from the meeting.
Looking at them right now.
Yeah.
Pretty quick to the point.
Yep.
They're fine by me.
I agree.
And Pat, they're also good by me. And in fact, thank you, Tricia. I really appreciate those minutes. There'll be times when we'll add some additional things, particularly when we have some conversations or some decisions that are going to make it to the board level. But those minutes really work for me. So thank you very much. We have a couple of policies on the agenda to discuss that we've been talking about for a couple of meetings. The first discussion item is policy 1230, which is public participation at school board meetings. I've been doing some research to see what other school districts have been doing and what they recommend. But I thought before we get into there, maybe we should have a conversation amongst ourselves about what we think would be the biggest thing we would need to accomplish with a policy that talks about public participation at school board meetings, and or what is sort of the wish list for future board members and future board meetings when we have a public comment period on our agenda. So Pat or Moira, I don't know if there's anything that you've been thinking about or want to make sure we include or add.
As luck would have it, Sean, I spent part of my lunch hour reviewing some of the NYSBA documents and New York state regulations about what is and is not permissible, and what we can and cannot do. Like, for instance, if we let people who are residents of the district comment, then we have to let people who are non-residents comment too. And I think we can specify the scope of the comments, but in Ithaca, given what we've seen so far, I am not sure that we want to make a really strong shift to only allowing people to discuss what's on the agenda for that day.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our practice.
Right. Right. I think I agree with Pat there. Also, I was looking at a document today that seemed to indicate that we had to allow people to comment on anything that was within the district's, I forget the word that it used, but within the district's purview, that anything that the district that concerns the district, period, not just anything that's listed on the agenda. And I'm not sure that I agree with Pat that I don't think we want to make like a big shift in our practice, because I think that would be problematic. But I think not necessarily to be encoded in policy, but for us to have some discussion about, what are the pitfalls of public comment, and how are we prepared to handle that?
Sure.
And I would say a lot, this on specifics to pitfalls, one is what we've already seen, anonymous comments. I'm thinking we might want to explicitly say that anonymous comments will not be accepted. And then also, as you've already reiterated here, just reiterating that personnel issues or complaints or against or praises of specific individuals just are not, cannot be, it's not a good public forum for them. You know, we cannot answer personnel issues. And I know that years ago, I remember years ago, we were more enforcing both sides of the coin. You know, if we can't say something bad about an individual, we shouldn't pick out certain individuals to say great things about them. And I think that side we've gotten lax on. And I think about that.
Meaning that we've allowed it to happen, that we haven't allowed it to happen?
That we have, you know, we've said we've been very complimentary of particular individuals who have done great things.
Yeah.
Good things.
So in almost every policy that I read, in particular, you know, I think almost, 80% of the districts are using New York State School Board Association templates, because they're almost verbatim what we have passed when I look across districts. There are a couple of things that I think I find to be somewhat interesting. One, I agree that we don't want to change our practice drastically. With that being said, I don't know if either of you had a chance to catch the skit that was on Saturday Night Live about school board participation at meetings. And so there is a way in which sometimes we're not even speaking about school board issues. And so I don't know how to do that. And that, I think it may have been Moira or Pat, I apologize. I don't know if that we need to code that in policy, but we do need to talk about our practice. I think we have allowed people to say things about particular individuals that are complimentary and also not complimentary. And so there's ways in which we have to make sure that that is in our policy, that we are not speaking about particular individuals. And some other districts have found ways, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but to put a time limit by the time that someone signs up, right? So it's like, if you need to let the board clerk know by 3 p.m. the day of the meeting, or by noon the day of the meeting, in order for us to plan appropriately for the amount of time that our public comment period should take. Some folks have created Google Forms. You know, they may or may not be useful. Is it on the agenda? Is it not on the agenda? And other folks have said things that there will not be any board response for an item that's being discussed that is not on the agenda, to allow school board members and school personnel to find an appropriate response, as opposed to trying to respond right then and there. I think we keep finding this balance that the role of the school board meeting is to do the work of the board, and yet it's one of the few times that there is interaction with public as well. So we keep trying to sort of walk that fine line. So I don't know, any thoughts about that? Or maybe, as we were talking about doing last meeting, we just put it on the agenda for the full board just for discussion, not that we're going to make any changes to the current policy.
To your point, Sean, I think that, you know, over the last, 10 plus years that I've been on, we have, especially in the last couple of years, moved into much more of a dialogue format. When someone brings something to our attention, we have started trying to get that answered in right then at the board meeting, and that really putting our administrative team on the spot to kind of be ready to handle anything that anyone in the district might fire at them. You know, and being recorded and creating a public record. And I think they've done a marvelous job at it, but it has seemed to me to be problematic. And for the first couple of years, I just don't remember that happening.
Yeah, and I agree with Pat on that, that I think it's problematic that we've kind of set up an expectation, that in real time, they'll get some information. And also I feel like we've kind of like fallen into a pattern of feeling like we all have to respond. And particularly like, if anybody expresses, sympathy or concern, we sort of feel like we all have to pile on with our own expressions. And I think I'd like to, for a variety of reasons, avoid that. Also, I had, let's see, there was something else that, I forget. There was something else that I was going to say. Maybe it'll come back to me.
So I don't know if this will work, but let me, as an example, and again, this is just one example. I don't know if the link will actually work. This is a link to Plattsburgh's policy 1230. And the phrase that caught me, and I think to Pat's point, that we have at times put our administrators, including principals and directors, in a very difficult situation. And I realize that times have changed as well, where there is an expectation of immediate engagement. But that this policy says, or part of this policy, is that the board president shall indicate that members of the board will listen to the remarks of the speaker, and that the board's policy is to take no action until such time as members of the district staff have reported to the board on any issue raised by the speaker. So to provide us a little bit of time to do some research, to make sure that we have the appropriate data, to make sure we have the appropriate answer, I think maybe something that we should consider. And under no form to stop or limit conversation, but to make sure that we're actually having a much more accurate and honest dialogue, I think would be something that's key. I also know, and we've all been on the board for a little bit of time as well. Pre-COVID, we would have board forums. We would go to almost every school and spend time or be at PTA meetings. That has, stopped, and I think it also has sort of limited some of the conversation and the ability for engagement that we have historically had. So I think people now just only see the school board meetings as the space for that to take place. But there may be other ways in which we can get to have much more of an open dialogue and conversation as well. So
I do think, especially in the past year or two, that people have decided that the way to get what they want is to come and present it to the board, and then we try to say kind, affirming things. And I think of the last meeting where our student reps were expressing a sincere concern about, knowing about what's happening with COVID in the schools, but what they were asking for was in violation of FERPA and HIPAA, and they just kept at it. And I am uncomfortable with the idea that if someone comes and, challenges enough, and we keep having this back and forth, that is how everyone will interact.
Well, this is the connection between policy 1400 as well, which is public comments and complaints, which one of the other policies or samples that I've read is that someone raises the concern, just like the students raised a legitimate concern about why can't we identify or have classroom contacts or, class contacts, that we say, great question, that will be on the agenda for the next board meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And that we cannot engage. One, we know it takes time for immediate things to happen, but to try to engage in the back and forth right there, I don't think is healthy for what the students are asking for, because we're oftentimes responding with lack of information. And, it puts, as, folks said, our administrators in the board in a position to respond immediately, and that may not be the best thing, even while we want to make we want to make sure that we address things in a timely manner as well. So I don't know if this, again, maybe the idea is we put our current policy on the board agenda with some sample language that other districts have used and just see if it's open for consideration. We can make some recommendations if that's something we want to do. What's the best way to proceed about this policy?
I do like the idea of involving the full board in a discussion of this rather than 1/3 of the board making recommendations, and perhaps a brief presentation with a couple of examples on what's happening in other districts could give some shape to a larger conversation. But I also recognize at the same time that so far this year, we have been, and late last year, we've been actively encouraging the student reps to take an active role.
Yeah.
Which yes, I mean, I think I agree. I do agree with that. I think that a presentation to the full board with some sample language and then having a discussion with all of us is a good way to go. And I think,
sorry.
Yeah, but I think that, we can still, encourage the students to take an active role, and they're taking an active role. They're giving us results of surveys, and I think it's still okay for us to say we will talk about this at we will put this on the agenda for the next meeting.
So what I would be envisioning here would be that we target like maybe 3 or 4 topics of concern. Whether we should be responding immediately, language to what's the word that I want to use? Reinforce, like we did in the last board meeting where you put that clause in about we cannot discuss personnel issues. I mean, that's more of a practice. We'll have that there, but we're not going to have debate on that. We're not going to open up saying, oh yeah, we're going to, discuss individuals and do, confidential information or personnel issues. But I think if we just like 3 things, reinforcing what are allowable topics, trying to pull back on answering immediately. I have been reading a number of, things, and although I was not able to do the NYSBA presentation live, I did watch that afterwards, and for instance, they're all saying, and it's also in the Plattsburgh, everything should be addressed to the board president and only the board president should answer. I don't think that's part of our culture as a board, but I take Moira's point that every individual doesn't have to make a comment on every topic that comes up. But that's more board practice. I don't think we should put that in policy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So a couple of things that I've written down from our conversation is some dialogue about the reading of anonymous letters. That's something that has come up multiple times. And I did have some conversation with our legal team about what is permissible and what is not permissible. Almost every policy asks people to state their name and the issue they're going to be speaking about, right? So whether they live in district or not in district, that for public record to have the name and the issue. That we have to find ways that anytime there's an identification of a particular personnel, that we somehow stop the public comment, and we had to find a way to do that respectfully and whatever that looks like. Trying to think about whether or not we respond immediately, or is the practice going to be to place on the agenda for the next board meeting, or to respond. It may not even have to be an agenda item, but there'll be a response at the next board meeting, not immediately at that time. And so, and that also leads into board responses. I agree, Pat and Moira. I feel like we all feel like we have to say something, right? And so there are oftentimes, every last board member responds in some way, and usually it's repetitive in terms of what we're saying. So trying to figure out what that looks like. And we may not be able to, that just may be our culture, and that may be what happens. And Pat, I agree. Every policy I read says that public comments and public letters should be addressed to the board president. And I don't think our community or our board works that way. So, but those are the things that I've written down. I don't know if there's anything else that folks would like to add.
You also mentioned prior notification and a deadline for prior notification. Now, it's been Rob's practice to say anybody else on the spot. And, that seems like, open and welcoming, but it also, can lead to more of a dialogue and a back and forth by doing that.
Yeah, and it also, for me, it depends on the topic, because sometimes what happens is it raises emotion, and then people who weren't going to speak now want to speak. And again, not that we shouldn't be hearing comments, but we also have a number of ways in which people can contact board members: via email, via the Let's Talk portal. All of our phones are listed. So I get plenty of phone calls afterwards. What I also put in the chat is an example of a form that another school district uses to make sure that we can have, again, a record of who's going to speak at public meetings. Talking to our legal team as well, that anything that is said during public comment is not required to be included in the minutes, though it's been our practice to include name and topic that has been discussed. And so I imagine that we'll continue that as well. But just want to know, at least from our legal team's perspective, that is not a legal mandate. We are not required to do that. I think it's good practice, but I just want to make sure we put that out there. So I'll come up with something for our next meeting on Tuesday that identifies this. We'll put this policy on, and we'll add those. I'll send out an email to Pat and Moira beforehand, just to make sure that I think I've captured it correctly, and anything you want to add, or if we miss anything, to go from there. Does that seem like a good idea?
Thank you for doing that, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
It is much appreciated.
Well, it seems like we all been reading about this policy. And Pat, I also watched the workshop on contentious board meetings that NYSBA put out. It seems like it's a statewide, if not national, issue if we're paying attention to what's happening. So more, I'm interested in just having public feedback and receiving that feedback. Policy 1400 is actually a little easier. In some regards, what the policy states is that any complaints or comments should be in writing to the board president or the superintendent. Mm-hmm. That has not necessarily also been our practice, but that's not something that we can't sort of return to. And I think one thing that the way in which we have written our policy, I think other communities have done it in a much more visual way, that there is a proper channel for complaints, which is to begin with the teacher or staff member, to work yourself to the principal or supervisor, to then work to the deputy superintendent, then the superintendent, and then the Board of Education. I find a lot of times in our community, people just jump 2 or 3 levels to whoever they want to talk to. And I think that we could sort of more visually, as opposed to putting it in paragraph form, we could separate it out like we've done in other places, either with some sort of numerical, 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C, D, whatever it may be. I don't know if that makes any sense, about what I'm saying?
Yes, an order or even a flow chart.
Yeah.
Teacher,
Yep.
building principal, administration team.
Mhm.
And I did find a couple of policies for 1400. Again, almost everybody is using NISBA's template language, but that were 2 paragraphs, you know, and ours isn't that long. I think ours is only 3 paragraphs,
Uh-huh.
but just something for us to keep in mind as well. Yeah, ours is only 3 paragraphs. I just think
Yeah.
that we just need to make it a little bit more visually clear about what the level of expectation is if you have a complaint or a comment and who do you speak to.
Mhm.
So if good by folks here, I'll make that happen, right? I mean, we have, again, in paragraph form. I'll just change that up so we can see sort of the order, keep the language as is, and still put it up for discussion as well at our next board meeting.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Did you see Lily's comment in the chat?
Yes. That would be very helpful, I think.
I'm sure I have it somewhere, but if we can make it much more easier to locate, that'd be great. Lily, thank you very much. Yeah, and this policy, and I didn't see from our minutes, I'm not sure when the last time we even updated this policy. It does make me think about that some of our policies, again, we've been talking about it, have not been updated for quite some time. And we may have to think about what that looks like. Yeah, this one we did in 2013, so it's almost 10 years ago, and the world has definitely changed since then. So fantastic, fantastic. And then anything else there? I'll follow up with Lily about the communication protocol. We'll take a look at this policy. We may just make some simple changes and put it up for discussion.
Perfect.
Okay.
I imagine that we will be putting the transportation policy back on the next agenda as well.
Didn't we pass? Oh, yes, we didn't pass it.
We didn't have a quorum.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have 5 votes.
We had a quorum. We didn't have a unanimous 5 votes.
Yep. So if it's good by folks, I will just add that to the next agenda item as well.
Yes.
Great. And then lastly, I think we already gave an update about the code of conduct. I will send policy committee members the current version of the code of conduct, the draft that's being written. Dan has been doing amazing work in trying to think about what the table of contents are. I think we made mention that we also had a conversation with a graphic design team, a faculty member at Ithaca College and a recent graduate from Ithaca College who have been willing to take this on and seems to understand from my perspective, Dan, exactly what we're talking about when we say how to communicate some of these things visually, in addition to just sort of text. And Pat and Moira, what I will say is, as the more I read it, the more I think we have to hone in on some of the language. And so, for example, some of the sections, it says repeatedly, you know, the student's parent, the student's parent, the student's parent, you know, as an example, like that's not our custom, just to sort of refer to parents. And so it will need us to do some read through. The good thing is only 18 pages long, and not all of it is, it's not text dense, if that makes sense. But it will require us to do some thinking and some language check. So I'll send that your way. I don't know what our timetable is. Dan knows that I keep trying to find a good timetable that works for everybody, but I also know that this will not be ready until the beginning of next school year. So we want it done well before then, but we won't be publishing or printing anything before next academic year.
Okay.
So that's it on my end. Anything else that we need to do? Any policy that we have to think about? Are you all just trying to let me have a good evening?
I'm in shock. If we're
Yes.
having our meeting, I am literally in shock. In a good way.
Great. All right, transportation policy, policy 1230 about public participation, policy 1400 about public complaints. The last two policies are discussion item and not up for a first reading. And the transportation policy is up for a second reading and adoption.
Yeah.
And can we move up HR? But yeah, it's.
Well, we might, I could communicate with Sean and Nicole and see if they're available, say at 6 o'clock rather than 6:30.
Only speaking for the HR folks that are waiting around, but.
Right. So, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So I'll contact them and let you know if they're ready to start at 6.
Just for staff and everybody. And since you have nothing to talk about, I guess, you should quit. Well, end your meeting, Sean, right? So.
Well, thank you for the clarification, Rob. I thought you were telling me to quit, so I didn't. But yes, we can call the meeting to end the meeting, and folks can take a break and do what they got to do, and hopefully give you a little bit more time back, and we'll go from there.
Sean, I would never, I misspoke, and I should never use the word quit in your presence regarding anything. So I won't do that. Never again. But more, it's just enjoy the evening, I think is more.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you all.
The Yankees in Boston are playing sometime today. So
yeah, don't scare me, Rob. I don't like these one game play-ins, but I will go watch it in a minute, so we'll go from there. All right, good folks. Have a good evening. We'll see everybody on Tuesday.
thanks, everybody.
Okay.